What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my 5 favorite genres in video games. Now, that said, these are just my favorites. They're not meant to be the best of the best because at the end of the day, stuff like that does come down to personal opinion. Now, if you watch my channel at all, truthfully, you could probably pretty easily guess a few of these. But I mostly review and play a lot of RPGs, specifically CRPGs, and as such, this list isn't really going to contain things like first-person shooters, but if that's your thing, more power to you. They're just not for me. But with no further ado, let's actually jump right into this. Now, the number 5 spot, I genuinely think might actually surprise some people, and that is because it is narrative games. So narrative games can take a few different forms, but typically speaking, they function much like a choose-your-own-adventure book. Some of these are much more comic book or even novel kind of focused, but they are nonetheless actual games. And then more recently, we've actually seen a few games trying to push the envelope here a little bit, such as Game Deck, which released last year, which is probably the footage I'm showing for this actually. But one of the key features of narrative games is that there tends to not be any skill or character-based combat or anything. There might be combat situations that rely on skills that you've chosen for that character, but you're very rarely in direct control of the combat or the flow, etc. And it's really more about the choices and the story being told, hence the narrative game. And while I admit these aren't the most exciting games in the world, I do find myself enjoying them pretty regularly just as a short, usually between 5 to 10 hour experience that again is kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure style piece of media. Now, in the number 4 spot, I have a bit of a guilty pleasure, truth be told, and that is open-world RPGs. So I don't think I really need to explain too much about the open-world RPG, especially to the people watching this video most likely. But nonetheless, these tend to be sprawling, rather long games filled with content, the quality of which very much so varies by title. And while a lot of these games can ultimately be fairly cookie-cutter in their format, truth be told, these are nonetheless games that large AAA companies like to pump out, which means they usually have a lot of resources behind them, and while yes, they can definitely be filled with filler, a lot of them are very good, at least on some level, and as such I enjoy these games almost as a guilty pleasure, especially since a great deal of them tend to be fairly shallow compared to the RPGs that I typically play, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a soft spot for them nonetheless, so here we are. Now, our number 3 spot goes to none other than ARPGs. I play a lot of ARPGs. I do not make content on them. Now that is primarily because I play ARPGs, relatively speaking, in a casual manner. As someone who reviews and plays video games basically for a living at this point, sometimes I like to enjoy my hobby doing something that doesn't involve work in some way. And basically that's what ARPGs are for me. I don't try to be super cutting edge with them or keep up with the latest meta, etc. Sometimes I just play them because I enjoy playing them. Diablo 2 specifically, actually, the original version, got me through a very rough time in my childhood, and as such I've just had a fondness for the genre since then. But truth be told, you name an ARPG, I've probably played it, I just haven't covered it. Played a lot of Wolcen, Torchlight, 1 and 2, didn't really touch 3. Diablo, obviously. I actually have collector's editions of a couple of the Diablos. And it's just a genre that I have a lot of love for, even though I don't really want to make content for it, if that makes sense. And in our number 2 spot, we have the TRPG. Now, as I said, I love CRPGs, which means that it's definitely a mystery what number 1 is, right? Now, that's an important thing to say because TRPGs often go hand in hand with CRPGs. But in my opinion, there's a few specific differences. With TRPGs, the focus is, of course, on the combat because the T stands for tactics or tactical. However, in their execution, they tend to be fairly similar to CRPGs, just with less emphasis on the story. And in fact, some recent entries have blurred those lines pretty significantly to where some games could probably be labeled both. But one of the key distinctions, I think, between the two genres is that TRPGs tend to have win conditions for battles outside of just killing everything. For instance, you might have to kill a specific character who's being guarded, you might have to free hostages and escape, you might have to reach a certain location on the battlefield, you might simply have to survive for so many rounds. And along with many other objectives I can't really list in their entirety, my point is that the win condition tends to be things other than just killing everything. That tends to be one of the primary distinctions between the two things. And then the second one is, again, the story. Though this is the part where the crossover is getting fairly significant because, just to give a game I'm currently reviewing, we have Expeditions Rome. Expeditions Rome I would basically call a CRPG myself. There's a ton of story here, but nonetheless, the emphasis really is on the combat. They've just blended in a surprising amount of side quests and variants into their story with options and things that you really could call it a CRPG. But as I've expressed in the past, I love deep character building and combat systems, so it's really a no-brainer that I enjoy TRPGs. Though admittedly, I haven't played nearly as many as CRPGs. And now, for our number one spot, which is absolutely, truly a mystery to everyone watching this video. It's CRPGs, guys. So I love CRPGs. If you've watched the channel, again, absolutely no surprise to you. This is my favorite genre. This is kind of like what I play video games for. It's the perfect combination, in my opinion, of character and world building. And while I pretty openly admit that they are nonetheless relegated to a fairly niche market, which, by the way, is still millions, which feels ridiculous to say, but it's not exactly the 100 million blockbuster title that we get from a lot of AAA companies, which is unfortunately why you don't really see any AAA CRPGs. Now, there are a couple that are insanely close to that are borderline, such as Divinity Original Sin 2 or Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and the upcoming Baldur's Gate 3. If you want to consider that a CRPG, believe it or not, just what a CRPG is a more hotly debated topic than you might realize, which I've also made videos about. But regardless of how you quantify it or feel about it, I love the genre. It means the world to me. This channel probably wouldn't exist if those games didn't, because a great deal of this channel is dedicated to reviews and guides of a ton of CRPGs. So here we are, thanks to that genre. But there you go, guys. That's enough of me rambling on. Hope you enjoyed the video. By all means, tell me what your favorite genres of games are down below. Even if you're not a stalwart RPG fan like myself, I love video games. And regardless of the type of video game you're playing, more power to you. Let me know about it. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.